Rome, Spain, Britain, three of the most dominant civilizations ever to exist. All of them controlled vast territories, commanded powerful armies, and ruled for centuries. And all of them collapsed the exact same way: currency destruction, self-inflicted economic suicide. And here's what should terrify you. The United States is following that exact playbook, step by step, decision by decision. Let's begin. Let's begin with Rome, the empire that dominated the ancient world for over 500 years. At its height, Rome ruled 60 million people across 3 continents. Its armies were legendary. Its roads connected civilizations. Its currency, the denarius, was accepted from modern-day England to Egypt. The denarius was introduced in 211 BC. It was a silver coin containing roughly 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, Rome kept that silver content consistent. When you held a denarius, you knew exactly what it was worth. Pure silver, real value. That consistency created trust, and that trust allowed Rome to build an empire. But here's the problem with empires: they're expensive. Every generation, Rome's borders expanded. More territory meant more soldiers, more fortifications, more administrators, more infrastructure, and eventually more costs than Rome could afford. So they did what governments always do when they run out of money. They cheated. Emperor Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, was the first to seriously tamper with the denarius. He needed funds for his extravagant lifestyle and military campaigns, so he ordered the mints to reduce the silver content from 100% to 94%. That 6% difference, pure profit for the emperor. He could now mint more coins with the same amount of silver. More currency in circulation meant more spending power for the government, but it also meant inflation. Still, 94% silver was close enough. The real damage came later. By 211 AD, under Emperor Caracalla, the denarius had dropped to 50% silver. Half real value, half cheap metal. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, it contained just 5% silver. What was once a pure silver coin was now 95% worthless metal with a thin silver wash. Imagine being a Roman soldier in 265 AD. You're being paid in coins that look like denarii, stamped with the emperor's face, bearing the same name, but they're worth 1/20th of what they were worth 2 centuries earlier. The government insists nothing has changed, but your pay buys almost nothing. Prices exploded. What cost 1 denarius in 200 AD cost 50 denarii by 300 AD. Farmers stopped accepting coins and demanded barter. Soldiers refused to fight unless paid in actual gold or goods. Tax collection became impossible because nobody wanted the currency. The entire economic system seized. And here's the critical part. Rome wasn't invaded yet. The borders were still defended. This wasn't caused by plague or famine. This was completely self-inflicted. The Roman government destroyed its own currency to fund spending it couldn't sustain. And when the currency died, everything built on that currency died too. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially ended, not because barbarian tribes were stronger militarily, but because Rome couldn't pay its armies, couldn't fund its government, couldn't maintain its roads and aqueducts. The currency had been debased into worthlessness, and the empire collapsed with it. The pattern: military expansion, unsustainable spending, currency debasement, inflation, loss of trust, collapse. Rome proved it could happen. Fast forward 1,200 years to Spain in the 1500s. The Spanish Empire is just beginning its rise. Columbus has reached the Americas. Cortez has conquered the Aztecs. Pizarro has conquered the Incas. And Spain suddenly controls the richest territories on the planet. In 1545, Spanish conquistadors discovered the Cerro Rico mountain in Potosi, in what's now Bolivia. This wasn't just a silver deposit. It was the largest concentration of silver ever found in human history. For the next century, Potosi alone would produce nearly half the world's silver supply. Ship after ship crossed the Atlantic, carrying millions of pounds of silver to Spanish ports. Spain melted this silver into coins. The Spanish dollar became the world's first truly global currency. It was used from Europe to Asia, trusted everywhere, pure in content, and backed by seemingly endless supply. Spain became the wealthiest empire on Earth. At its peak, the Spanish Empire controlled territory on every inhabited continent. They ruled the Philippines, most of Central and South America, parts of Italy, the Netherlands, and more. And then, just like Rome, they destroyed themselves. Because here's the thing about money. Having more of it doesn't make you richer if everyone else has more too. When Spain flooded Europe with silver, prices rose. What cost 1 silver coin in 1500 cost 10 coins. By 1600, the silver itself hadn't changed. There was just vastly more of it chasing the same amount of goods. That's inflation. Spain was importing so much silver that it was destroying the value of silver itself. And worse, Spain wasn't producing anything of value. No industries, no innovation, no manufacturing. They were simply extracting wealth from colonies and spending it on wars, palaces, and luxury imports from France, England, and the Netherlands. The silver flowed in from the New World and flowed right back out to buy goods Spain didn't produce itself. By the late 1500s, Spanish kings were drowning in debt. King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, inherited 36 million ducats in debt from his father Charles V. Instead of cutting spending, Philip borrowed more. He fought wars on multiple fronts, against the Ottoman Empire, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England. And when the debt became impossible to repay, he did something unprecedented. In 1557, Philip II declared bankruptcy. He suspended all debt payments. This was the first sovereign default in modern European history, but it wasn't the last. Spain defaulted again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596. 4 bankruptcies in 40 years. Despite controlling half the world's silver production, Spain couldn't pay its bills. Each default destroyed trust. Lenders refused to lend. Interest rates on Spanish debt soared, and the government responded the same way Rome did. They debased the currency. They minted coins with less silver. They introduced copper coins that were supposed to equal silver coins in value. Nobody believed it. Confidence evaporated. By the 1600s, Spain was in irreversible decline. The military couldn't be funded. Colonies began to slip away. And by the time the 30 Years' War ended in 1648, Spain's era as a superpower was over. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was essentially finished. The nation that once controlled the world's wealth had spent and borrowed itself into irrelevance. The pattern repeats. Massive wealth, government overspending, excessive borrowing, currency inflation, defaults, loss of confidence, collapse. Even unlimited resources couldn't save an empire from fiscal mismanagement. Now, let's look at the empire that lasted longest. Britain, the empire that ruled longer, stretched farther, and controlled more wealth than Rome and Spain combined. At its peak in 1922, the British Empire governed 458 million people, 1/4 of the world's population, 1/4 of the world's land. The sun literally never set on the British Empire because they controlled so much territory that it was always daytime somewhere under their flag. And the foundation of it all was the British pound sterling. For over 2 centuries, the pound was the world's reserve currency. More than 60% of global trade was conducted in pounds. The gold standard anchored everything. 1 pound could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. This created trust, stability, and power. But empires run on credit, and credit must be repaid. Britain financed its empire through borrowing. Government bonds funded wars, colonies, infrastructure, and administration. As long as the pound held its value, the system worked. Then came World War I. In 1914, Britain's national debt stood at £650 million. By 1919, after 4 years of total war, it had exploded to over £7 billion, a 10-fold increase in just 5 years. To fund the war, Britain borrowed from everyone, its own citizens, the United States, anyone willing to lend. But the war also forced Britain off the gold standard. In 1914, the government suspended gold convertibility. They had to print money to fund the war effort, and they couldn't maintain gold backing while doing so. The pound became a fiat currency, backed only by the government's promise. After the war, Britain tried to return to gold. In 1925, Winston Churchill, serving as Chancellor of the Exchequer, restored the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. This was a catastrophic mistake. The pound was overvalued. British exports became too expensive. Unemployment soared, and the government had to maintain crushing interest rates to defend the currency, which strangled economic growth. By 1931, Britain was forced off gold permanently. The pound was devalued, and trust in British currency began to crumble. But the real destruction came with World War II. Britain entered the war already deeply in debt. The conflict cost everything. By 1945, Britain's national debt had reached 270% of GDP. The empire had bankrupted itself to win the war. Cities lay in ruins. The economy was shattered. And Britain owed enormous debts to the United States. In 1944, while the war still raged, the Bretton Woods Conference redesigned the global financial system. The British pound was officially replaced as the world's primary reserve currency. The US dollar took its place. Britain fought desperately to keep the pound's status, but it was over. They had massive debt, but no longer had the gold or economic strength to back their currency. What followed was a slow, painful decline. In 1947, Britain attempted to make the pound fully convertible again. The experiment lasted 6 weeks before a run on the currency forced them to reimpose controls. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. In 1967, it was devalued again. Each devaluation destroyed savings, crushed confidence, and signaled to the world that Britain was no longer a first-rate power. Meanwhile, the empire disintegrated. India gained independence in 1947, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, and Britain's military response was a humiliating failure. Colony after colony broke away, not because they were militarily conquered, but because Britain could no longer afford to hold them. By the 1970s, Britain was on the verge of collapse. Inflation hit 25%. The government had to beg the IMF for a bailout. The pound, once the world's reserve currency, had become a symbol of decline. The empire that controlled a quarter of the earth had lost it all within 30 years. Not through military defeat, through currency collapse and debt. The pattern again: war debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status, devaluation, inflation, imperial collapse. Britain proved that even the strongest empire can fall within a single generation when its currency fails. Which brings us to today. The United States, the current empire, the current reserve currency. And every single warning sign that destroyed Rome, Spain, and Britain is flashing red right now. Let's start with the currency. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the dollar the global standard, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold, literally. But just like Rome, just like Britain, the United States started spending more than it had. The Vietnam War, Great Society programs, military bases around the world. By the 1960s, foreign governments began noticing that America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back. France, under Charles de Gaulle, started demanding gold in exchange for dollars. Other nations followed. Gold was leaving Fort Knox. The bluff was being called. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard. No more gold backing. The dollar became pure fiat currency, just like the debased Roman denarius, just like the pound after 1931, backed by nothing except trust and government promises. At first, it seemed fine. The petrodollar system established in the 1970s created artificial demand because oil was priced globally in dollars. But the spending never stopped. The debt kept growing. In 1980, U.S. national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, $5.6 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. Today, in 2025, it's over $36 trillion. So that's a 40-fold increase in 45 years. And it's accelerating. But debt is only part of the story. Like Rome debasing the denarius, like Spain flooding the world with silver, the United States is printing money. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing. They call it quantitative easing, necessary to stabilize the economy, they said. During COVID, they printed over $4 trillion in just 2 years. More money created than in the entire previous century. And just like every empire before, they told us it wouldn't cause inflation. That modern economics had solved the old problems. That we were different. We're not different. Inflation hit 9% in 2022. Real inflation, the prices ordinary people actually pay for food, housing, and healthcare, is far higher. The dollar is being debased. Slowly at first, but the pattern always accelerates. And just like Britain lost reserve currency status, the United States is losing it too. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, it's 58% and falling. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new members, are actively building alternatives. They're trading in local currencies, creating new payment systems, reducing dollar dependence. China and Russia are aggressively buying gold. Central banks worldwide are diversifying away from dollars. The world is preparing for the dollar to lose its dominance, just like they prepared for the pound's fall. And here's the most dangerous parallel. The United States has Rome's problem. Military overextension. The U.S. maintains nearly 800 military bases in over 70 countries. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion annually. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $8 trillion. The empire is expensive, and it's being funded with debt and printed money. Just like Rome couldn't pay its legions with debased coins, just like Spain couldn't fund its military after repeated defaults, just like Britain couldn't maintain its empire after currency collapse. The United States is running out of time. Let me show you the pattern, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every empire that collapsed economically followed the same sequence. Not similar, identical. Stage 1, dominance. The empire is at its peak. Military strength, economic power, currency trust. Rome with the denarius, Spain with silver dollars, Britain with the pound, America with the dollar. At this stage, the currency is backed by something real: gold, silver, or trust, built over generations. Stage 2, overextension. The empire expands beyond its means. More territory, more military commitments, more promises to citizens. Rome across 3 continents, Spain controlling every ocean, Britain colonizing a quarter of the world, America maintaining bases on every continent. The costs become unsustainable. Stage 3, deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. At first, it's manageable. They borrow, they issue bonds, but the deficits become structural, permanent. Rome needed to pay legions. Spain needed to fund wars. Britain financed 2 world wars. America runs trillion-dollar deficits annually, even during economic growth. Stage 4, currency debasement. The empire can't borrow enough or tax enough, so they debase the currency. Rome reduced silver in the denarius. Spain flooded markets with silver, causing inflation. Britain abandoned gold and devalued the pound twice. America left gold in 1971 and has been printing ever since. Stage 5, inflation. More currency chasing the same goods means prices rise. Rome saw prices increase 50-fold. Spain experienced price inflation across Europe. Britain saw 25% inflation in the 1970s. America is experiencing inflation now, despite government claims it's transitory. Stage 6, loss of confidence. The domestic population and foreign nations lose trust. Roman soldiers demanded gold, not denarii. Spanish creditors refused to lend after defaults. The world shifted from pounds to dollars at Bretton Woods. Today, nations are actively shifting away from the dollar. Stage 7, collapse. The economic system fails. The currency becomes worthless or loses dominance. The empire can't fund its military or maintain control. Rome fell to tribes it could no longer pay to fight. Spain declined into irrelevance. Britain lost its empire within decades. And the United States? That's the question we're living through right now. That's the pattern. 7 stages repeated across 2,000 years. Different empires, different continents, different currencies, but the exact same sequence. Because the math doesn't change, you cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print prosperity, and you cannot debase your currency without consequences. The pattern is absolute. And we're currently in stage 5, moving rapidly towards stage 6. So what happens next? History gives us 3 possible outcomes. First, controlled decline. Like Britain after 1945, they lost the empire, lost reserve currency status, experienced painful devaluation and inflation, but the country survived. It adjusted to being a second-tier power, a slow, humiliating decline, but not total collapse. On a second, chaotic collapse. Like Rome in the 5th century, the currency becomes worthless, the government loses control, the empire fragments, and dark ages follow. This is the worst-case scenario. Complete systemic breakdown, not just economically, but socially and politically. A third, reset and restructure. A new currency system is established, maybe backed by gold again. Maybe a new reserve currency emerges, China's yuan, a basket of currencies or digital currencies. The old system dies, but something new replaces it relatively quickly. Painful, but survivable. The United States is at a crossroads. The debt cannot be repaid, not at current levels, not with current spending. The only options are default, inflation, or restructuring. Default would destroy dollar hegemony instantly. Inflation is already happening and will likely accelerate. Restructuring requires political will that doesn't currently exist. And here's what makes this different from Rome, Spain, or Britain. Those were regional empires. The US dollar is the global reserve currency. When the Roman denarius collapsed, it affected the Roman Empire. When the dollar collapses, it affects the entire world. Every central bank, every trade agreement, every financial market. The interconnected global economy amplifies both the impact and the chaos. But the pattern says it's coming, not because of prediction, but because of precedent. 4 empires, 4 currency collapses, 4 identical sequences. The math of empire is unforgiving. You can delay it, you can deny it, but you cannot avoid it. Rome debased its currency to pay legions. The denarius died, the empire fell. Spain flooded the world with silver. Inflation destroyed its wealth. The empire declined. Britain borrowed to fight 2 world wars. The pound collapsed. The empire dissolved. And now the United States prints trillions, runs endless deficits, and believes it's different. It's not different. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. It doesn't care about military strength or technological advancement. The pattern is economic. And economic laws are as absolute as physical laws. You cannot print wealth. You cannot borrow forever. And you cannot debase your currency without destroying your empire. 4 empires, 4 collapses, 4 identical patterns. The only question left is timing. How long until stage 6? How long until the world loses confidence in the dollar? How long until the American empire follows Rome, Spain, and Britain into the history books? The pattern says we're close. The debt says we're close. The money printing says we're close. And history, which has watched this exact sequence destroy 4 empires before, says the ending is inevitable. The only variables are how fast it happens and how painful it will be. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening, subscribe to Shadow Economics. Because when this pattern completes, you'll want to understand exactly what happened and why. History has all the answers, and the pattern never lies.